destroyed land of ash and bones. A motherland overtaken and bled dry by a hostile empire. If only those things were our only issue, then perhaps our tale would have gone differently, but alas, the story of Akatan would be interrupted by powers far beyond that of mortal men. Yet all that wasn't really a major concern when the second expedition returned from Yucatan Peninsula back to the floating city. The news they brought, about Mayan homeland being methodically depopulated by worshippers of the feathered serpent, were disturbing and grim, but at the same time they served as a reminder to all citizens of Akatan that their mission was not one that could be treated lightly. If they wished to save even a fraction of their brothers and sisters, people of the floating city had to abandon all other goals and focus solely on establishing a safe route back to their old homeland. And so, under Queen Kisa's guidance, the nation set off to walk. But as much as Her Majesty and her people wished to throw themselves into the fray and avenge their fallen empire, they knew that without proper preparations, an expedition to Yucatan would be doomed to failure, and so, following Queen Kisa's idea, settlers were dispatched east across the Great Ocean to establish colonies along the shore of Old Continent. Colonies that, in time, could be used as supply depots for the fated expedition. Unfortunately for the Mayans, such endeavor was not one that could be achieved in matter of months. Years or even decades had to pass until a proper network of ports could be established, and all the while, people of Yucatan would suffer untold cruelties at the hands of their oppressors. But at the same time, that delay could be used to provide people of Akatan with some advantages. New weapons could be developed along with new tactics and strategies that would maximize their efficiency. New models of ships could be designed that would one day transport thousands of soldiers back into Central America. And most importantly, more territories could be taken, and more people coerced or convinced to join Akatani army on their journey. With such goal in mind, Mayan refugees once more turned their attention inward and focused on preparing for their journey back, and a major part of this preparation was another invasion of Ashikaga territory. Using unrest in the lands of former shogunate as a pretext, the Brass Army embarked on yet another campaign, and with less than a year, removed all opposition and forced the now devastated clan into an unconditional surrender. The island of Nippon was split in two between Mayan conquerors and new Aochi shogunate, and an uneasy peace followed, as both sides were unwilling to engage each other in yet another potentially devastating war. Just like before though, the conquered people were quickly accepted into the kingdom, and soon thousands of them flocked to Hokkaido and to colonies on the old continent to help with the Rana family's mission. And with that, the nation of Akatan ceased all their attempts to explore and establish new contacts across the world, and turned their undivided attention on their motherland. Slowly, day by day, month by month, and year by year, new outposts sprang from the ground along the shores of Old Continent, but as efficient as these endeavors were, Mayans were still forced to deal with many issues. The sheer distance that had to be traveled across the Great Ocean was one of them, and although Mayans proved to be surprisingly competent sailors, many of their vessels were still lost amongst unforgiving endless waves as they tried to make the journey. Back in the old land, local tribes were, on many occasions, hostile towards Akatani settlers and launched many raids against them, which further delayed the expedition. Soon, years turned into decades, and eventually Queen Kisa, the main driving power behind all preparations, has passed away, leaving her son, Achi, in charge of the kingdom. For several days, no one knew just how exactly this new king would approach plans of his predecessors, but in the end, the new king turned out to be even more zealous in his will to restore ancient motherland of his people than his mother was. Some even believed that he was constantly pushed into action by spirits of his mother and great-grandmother Nayeli, but regardless of reasons, Achi poured all resources he could into creating a new way home, going so far as to dismantling large parts of the floating city to create more space for ports and dockyards. And finally, over 3 decades after second expedition confirmed fears of Mayan leadership, the route back home was prepared, and the army that would be sent to Americas was standing ready. 60,000 infantrymen, 10,000 horsemen and 1,000 brass thunderer cannons, and all along the shore enough transport ships to ferry them across in one go. The king, despite his advanced age, stood at the head of this expedition as an acting commander and was surrounded by best officers from his entire force. Their goal, to travel back home and retake Yucatan Peninsula from worshippers of the feathered serpent, focusing on great city of Chichen Itza, where the now legendary Scholar King has supposedly prepared yet another revelation for his followers. Without a great ceremony, the fleet departed before dawn in early days of spring and, thanks to amazing efforts of their navigators and sailors, managed to reach their destination 6 months later, near the place where the floating pyramids were launched from, without losing even a single ship in the process. Along the way, they restocked their supplies in hundreds of outposts scattered across the shore, and so when the army finally disembarked, it was ready to begin their operation within few days, and almost immediately began their march north, fully prepared for violent and difficult struggle along the way. Yet for first several weeks, nothing happened. The army moved north in a compact column formation, always prepared for an ambush, but no attack ever came. Every village, town and city the Mayans have encountered along their way were nothing more but empty ruins, overgrown by rapidly spreading jungle. It was an eerie march through empty land. Not even birds or other animals could be heard thrashing in the jungle, and so Akatani soldiers moved on in a dreadful silence. All that changed, however, when they entered area once controlled by Old Kingdom of Itza. There, the leading column of the army has spotted a single man, walking towards them on an overgrown road. Though alone, he walked proudly, adorned with hundreds of feathers, and carrying a staff that marked him as a priest. But he did not come here to preach nor to threaten. He merely marched on until he almost reached the moving army. The leading column, expecting it to be some kind of ambush, stopped and formed a firing line and called the man to surrender. But in this moment, the priest raised his hand, in which he held a ceremonial dagger, and pointed it to the skies. Then, without warning, he plunged the blade into his own chest, again and again, carving open his own body until he finally dropped the dagger and, in front of stunned Akatani soldiers, reached inside and pulled out his own heart, still beating and dripping blood. For a second, he stood there motionless, and then, his arm still outstretched and his heart still beating, he took a step forward. That was enough for Mayan soldiers. Some of those who saw this gory spectacle dropped their weapons and ran away, but others, more disciplined ones, opened fire without hesitation. But that did not seem to have any effect. 100 muskets launched fire and steel at the priest, and he was struck by a dozen rounds, but despite these wounds, he still moved on without even flinching. "My gods are protecting me, warriors of the lost tribe," he shrieked, still taking one shaky step after another. "Can you say the same?" The second row raised their weapons and loosed another volley, turning the priest into a gory mess of blood and bones. Half of his head exploded in a fountain of blood, his arms and legs were torn off, and his chest could no longer hold itself together, but in spite of this punishment, he crawled on. "Our destiny is to remove you from this world," his corpse growled. "Yours is to be removed for the good of all." Third row prepared to fire, but after these words were spoken, the bloody mess that was the priest finally stopped moving. The men in the line stared at remains and at each other, speechless and stunned after such a horrifying display, but alas, their confusion did not last long. The jungle around them suddenly exploded with war cries, and warriors of enemy tribe charged from all directions along the length of entire column. The numbers were impossible to count, and although thousands were shot down before they could even reach Akatani lines, more still swarmed forward from amongst the trees. Yet once more, Mayan superior weaponry had a chance to shine. Muskets and cannons were brought to bear within moments and fired in all directions, decimating incoming warriors, who had no means of defending themselves against such weapons. They were armed like Mayans of old, with wooden spears, stone clubs, and simple bows and javelins that were no match for disciplined Akatani lines. Some, however, also carried metal blades, straight and sleek, of a design that no one has ever seen before, and while most warriors rushed into battle wearing only cloth or leather armor, some had far more efficient defenses, in form of metal breastplates and helmets. Despite their superior craftsmanship, however, it was clear that these pieces of armor, along with metal blades, were in poor condition. Most were bent or dented, as if they were taken from defeated foes, but despite that damage they were still deadly in hands of fanatical warriors, who charged at Akatani columns without even a moment of hesitation. Yet even all that was not enough to break Mayan force. Brass soldiers might have reeled from the ferocity of enemy attack at first, but they soon regrouped, reorganized themselves and, slowly and methodically, took down every single enemy that rushed at them from the jungle. The slaughter lasted for hours, and in many places bodies of the fallen, feathered warriors piled up so much that they formed walls along the road. But in the end, Mayan expeditionary force prevailed, but not before being forced to kill every single attacking warrior, as not one of them was willing to either retreat or surrender. The battle was over, and although Akatani army lost around 1/5 of its men, their way to Chichen Itza was finally open. Despite that bloody ambush, however, the rest of the journey went peacefully, although, at the same time, the complete lack of life in the area did little to lift spirits of Akatani army. What few towns or cities they found along the road were empty, and as they marched deeper and deeper into their old territories, they began to realize that any chance of saving even a fraction of their people has long passed. Yet despite this grim outlook, some hope remained, as many foot soldiers and officers alike hoped that their greatest city would still be inhabited. But when the army reached its destination, it was welcomed by a scene similar to the ones they have witnessed over the past few months. The city of Chichen Itza was an empty, silent ruin, already mostly overgrown by jungle, and the only sign that indicated that it was ever inhabited were a handful of long decomposed corpses scattered around the streets. As many feared from the very start of this expedition, there was no longer anything left to save in the Yucatan Peninsula, save for painful memories of exterminated people. But at the very least, the king could still pursue the second part of his mission, and so he and his advisors, myself, his chronicler included, directed our steps toward the central pyramid of the city, mostly spared by rapidly growing vegetation. Royal entourage, and I have to admit me as well, had little hopes for that endeavor, but our doubts were dispelled once we reached the top of the pyramid. As soon as our king set foot on the top platform, a spirit manifested right in front of our eyes and began speaking in a tongue that no one could understand. No one, except for His Majesty, who fell to his knees in shock and proclaimed that the mirage in front of us was the very Scholar King himself, or, at the very least, his memory. Many could not understand why such a great character would not speak Mayan tongue, but King Achi explained that he was still able to understand every word thanks to his divine crown, and as the spirit continued its speech, the King of the Living relayed it to us as best as he could. The Scholar King was proud of us for finding the divine crown and for bringing it here just as he willed it, for that crown, which held what little power true Mayan gods still possessed, was the only tool that could save Mayan people and all other peoples of the world from the malicious power that preyed on chaos. The same power that, as Scholar King believed, also took hold of the worshippers of the feathered serpent and used them as unwitting tools to create as much death and destruction as possible. It granted them untold power that enabled them to conquer all neighboring tribes and then, slowly but surely, started to spread its corrupting influence outwards, causing that dreaded winter in which entire Mayan civilization collapsed. The Scholar King tried to prevent it, and together with his most trusted advisors and best warriors embarked on a long journey into the very heart of enemy tribe in order to find the seat of the wicked power and destroy it once and for all. But even with all his knowledge and all his power, he failed. His followers succumbed to corruption one by one, and before long the Scholar King was alone, desperately trying to infiltrate hostile lands without help. Great many months he had spent in the dark, foreboding jungles of Mexico, but finally he managed to reach the capital of his foes, only to realize that it was an impenetrable fortress. The city itself was but a shadow in the distance, surrounded by dozens of heavily fortified towns that made approach impossible. Yet it was also clear that in the very middle of that ring of defenses, the Scholar King would find the source of all their troubles. Alone, however, he could not hope to defeat it, and so he returned to his already destroyed land and, feeling corruption slowly overtaking him as well, prayed to the true gods, begging them to guide the handful of refugees should they ever reach their tomb in the frozen north. The only hope now was his contingency plan, too insane to even believe it. And then he used what little power he had left to prepare this message, in which he begged his successors, those brave and resourceful enough to bring the divine crown back to Chichen Itza, to use the power of that great artifact to march into enemy capital and destroy the central pyramid there, which he believed was the seat of the wicked demonic presence. It would not be an easy task, but the crown itself could protect the king and those near him from corrupting influence of this mysterious foe, which could give them a chance to accomplish their goal. And so, when those revelations were uncovered, King Achi gathered all of us, and once more at the head of the army began marching west to finish the job Scholar King started centuries ago, and to avenge this great leader's sacrifice. A word was sent to the fleet to move on as well, and bring as many reinforcements from home as they could, because now, without a doubt, servants of the fake feathered serpent would throw all their might against Mayan force. More months went by as our column marched through increasingly dark and inhospitable jungles deeper into enemy heartlands, but, despite our fears, we met no resistance along the way. The land was just as empty and silent as Yucatan, and, to our untold surprise, we realized that even settlements of the enemy tribe were just as devoid of life as ours. Soon, not even the sun could be seen in the sky, and we marched in grim darkness, constantly expecting enemy attack. Once more, though, no such thing happened, and we managed to reach the ring of fortresses that surrounded the central city of enemy tribe, and if those defenses looked impenetrable to the Scholar King, to us they seemed near impossible to even describe. Entire area dozens of kilometers away from the city was turned into a killing ground, with walls, forts and towers making any approach an impossible task. But at the same time, those defenses that made attack impossible for other tribes were of little consequence for our brass thunderer cannons, and so the army prepared for a long siege, ready to open a way into the center of enemy defenses by smashing their forts one by one. Or so we hoped. Mere seconds after first volley of cannon rounds was fired, an earth-shaking cry shook the jungle around us. The forts exploded with activity, their gates were thrown open, and thousands upon thousands of warriors charged at us, clearly hoping to deny us the advantage our artillery gave us. And even with our weapons, even with our reinforcements and tactics, we were no match for the worshippers of chaos. They stormed our positions one by one without caring for their losses, and though their dead piled up in mountains around the battlefield, they managed to push us back within a day. Our army was gone, surrounded and ripped to shreds in a bloody massacre, and only thanks to bravery of our royal guard, His Majesty and I, his humble servant, managed to flee. King Achi, despite his wounds and this terrifying defeat, was not ready to give up, however. He decided that we should flee back to the fleet, return home, rebuild our forces, and try again, and again, and again if need be, for if left unchecked, this vile power was bound to cause untold destruction all around the world. And so we fled, near a few dozen out of tens of thousands, and made our way back towards the shore, constantly hounded by enemy attacks and the weather itself, as the entire area seems to be consumed by a violent storm of great power that no one has ever seen in their lives. One by one, our guards fell, until finally it was just me and His Majesty left. We fled through dark jungles as fast as we could, and we could finally smell the wind from the ocean. But in that very moment, King Achi turned to me and told me to leave him and go ahead, to do everything in my power to bring that chronicle you're witnessing right now back home, so that everyone could see what happened. Confused, I asked him why he wouldn't come with me if the shore and safety were so close, to which he only pointed to the north. An odd, otherworldly light glimmered amongst the trees, moving closer and closer with every second. The true enemy was finally about to show itself, but only the one wearing the divine crown could face it, and so, with a heavy heart, I left my king behind and ran towards the shore. And as soon as I reached it, I realized just how outclassed we were from the start, and how impossible that whole expedition was. The fleet was there, true, but it was completely and utterly destroyed. Entire shoreline was covered in destroyed ships, thrown ashore by the storm. Not a single vessel remained undamaged, and not a single sailor survived the destruction of the fleet. My only way of returning home is gone, and now I am alone, far away from home, in a place where the very nature wishes me dead. I hid myself under one of these wrecked ships to escape the rain, and used that moment of respite to put that last bit of my chronicle together, even though I have no means to send it home. All I can do now is wait. The light that shone in the forest is gone, and I can see a figure moving towards me along the beach. I hope with all my heart that it's His Majesty, but in truth, my entire being tells me that I should make my peace, for my story has come to an end as well. But I will not cower in fear waiting for it.
So you're here, human. We have to say, despite everything we learned about your people, you still managed to surprise us. We thought that you would try to hide or attack us as we came closer.
Your Majesty, you're alive. What happened to you?
Majesty? Our apologies for confusion, human, but we're afraid that the being that once inhabited this body is no longer here now that we borrowed it. Alas, if only your king was reasonable and willing to listen to us, then perhaps all of this could have been avoided. But perhaps... yes, perhaps you will be more willing to listen to our offer.
Offer? What are you talking about, creature? What in God's name are you, and what have you done to His Majesty?
As we said, we were forced to borrow his body, although, in our defense, we did try to communicate with your king first. Unfortunately, he deemed conversation useless and decided to attack us, which led to his untimely demise. And as for what we are, we're afraid that we do not have centuries needed to properly explain it, but you may call us the Shroud. We watch over walls like yours and ensure that certain events happen without outside interruption, which, we are afraid to say, forced us to use the tribe of feathered serpent against you.
Then you must be that creature that destroyed our gods. Stay back, fiend. I will not be corrupted by your lies.
We are sad to say this, but the only lies here are the ones that have been placed in your mind by your king, who in turn learned them from his predecessor, who in turn learned them from the one you call the Scholar King. Which makes you, and the likes of you, blameless in this whole story, mere casualties of deranged ambitions of other powers. So we promise you that in this conversation we shall utter truth, and only truth. That is, of course, if you are willing to listen.
And what if I refuse?
Then we will be forced to borrow your body as well, and use it to accomplish our goals in less than peaceful way. But it doesn't matter. We know that you are going to accept, for you wish to understand what happened to you and your people. For you witnessed their story whilst making that chronicle of yours, and have questions that no one can answer. No one, that is, except us.
Very well then, beast. Speak, but do not dare to lie or omit anything. Now, tell me, what are you, and why are you so obsessed with eradicating my people?
As we said, we are the Shroud, and you may consider us guardians of time. And as for our obsession, as we said, our duty is to ensure that certain events happen without outside intervention. But you, we are afraid to say, and your entire nation are exactly that kind of intervention, even though you are not aware of it. The kingdom of Akatan should never come into existence. You simply should not be here. You should be dead. The only place for Mayan people is in memories of other, infinitely more important and powerful nations.
And who are you to decide whether or not we should live?
We do not make such decisions, human. History does. As we speak, on the other side of the ocean, two nations are slowly but surely moving towards confrontation. They too are not aware of it yet, but the conflict between them will dominate their histories for millennia to come and reach areas and ages that you cannot even imagine. And unfortunately, your presence may derail their expansion, which is why we walk to correct the mistake that is your existence before it is too late.
So that you can use their conflict for your own means? His Majesty warned us that you are a monster that feasts on chaos and bloodshed. But if that's the case, then we have no choice but to stop these two countries and deny you the power their wars will grant you. Even if that means butchering them all to the last man.
If only things were so simple, human. And although we cannot deny that we will profit from their rivalry, but so will countless others in places so far away that you could not even imagine such distances. For through their endless conflicts, these two nations will, unknowingly, constantly push each other forward, which in time will allow them to defend a great many worlds against opponents far more monstrous than us. What's more, you yourselves are nothing else but a fruit of their conflict. As we said, their rivalry will continue for ages to come, but in their constant push to outmaneuver one another, they will make a mistake. Their great knowledge and necessity to defeat an invasion from a place of death will lead them to an amazing discovery that will allow them to cross space and time. And although most of them will use that great discovery to move forward, some misguided souls will inevitably try to use it to look back. They have, or they will, create an expedition and send it back here to gain an advantage over their foes before their conflict can even begin, unaware that without their rivals both sides and countless unseen others are doomed to failure along the way. Sadly, such insight has never come to them, and their mission was sent, but what these people failed to realize was that traveling across time is not an easy task. Most have arrived too early and perished when your world was not even formed yet. Some arrived too late to affect anything and were doomed to slowly decay on a world that was no longer fit for them. But one of them arrived relatively close, still in a wrong time and certainly in a wrong place, but thanks to all knowledge of his people he could survive several centuries needed to achieve his objective. Even better for him, his... how do we explain it in terms you would understand? His mobile home arrived with him as well, albeit it crashed in the frozen north, where its operator could not reach it. Still though, he could succeed. He could accomplish his mission and deliver knowledge from the stars to his people, but he got too greedy. He went native, as he called it himself. He could not move to his destination at once without causing too many distortions, but got bored of hiding in caves and jungles and mountains, so he found a tribe, uplifted it, and prepared it to act as servants for his original countrymen, once they actually reached the area he was in. And we can see from the look in your eyes that you know who this man was. The one you call the Scholar King. A man who only wished to use you as tools to support his true homeland.
I wish I could deny it, but it makes sense. All his knowledge, the length of his rule. But in that case, why couldn't you just take him down and restore the history to what it's supposed to be? Why allow us to survive, to rebuild and regain hope, only to try and destroy us anyway?
Because, as we said, we have not noticed it fast enough, and our influence in this world needs time and effort to grow, so we were forced to act through proxies, like the tribe of the feathered serpent. Now though, we are finally ready. Our other servants have created another way into this world, two, in fact, that we can use far more effectively, but we still needed to recover and destroy certain piece of technology that should not be here, the object that you call the Divine Crown. But we managed to manipulate the machine in the frozen north, so that it convinced you to bring it directly into our hands. And now, with our servants finally here, we could simply eradicate you, remove you from this world in a matter of minutes, and let history return to its intended flow. But as we said, you are blameless in this. You were used by overambitious fools, and we feel that there may be other places in which your history could continue, once far away from here. And this is our offer. Surrender to us, people of Akatan. Give up your struggle, abandon your homes, and travel to the frozen lands in the north. There, our servants will await you and guide you towards salvation.
And how could I decide it on behalf of everyone back home? Only our king could, but you took him away from us.
Indeed, but we can still lead him back to your floating city and talk through him. We will need someone to confirm our story, though. Someone like you, Chronicler.
And what's the alternative?
We will send our servants into your lands and wipe out each and every one of you. We will remove your cities from the face of the world, and we will entice great waves to sink all of your ships. Before this cycle is done, your people will be gone, and the world will forget about you within a single generation, even without our intervention.
I see. Then I guess I have no other choice but to accept and pray to the gods that you will not betray us.
You have our word, human. We feel that your presence in that other area would be very beneficial for you, and for us. Now, allow us to summon our servants, so that you and your king can return home quickly and safely.
Very well then, but allow me to ask just one more question. The tribe of the feathered serpent, if you use them to dispose of us, then wouldn't their presence destabilize events as well?
No. As we speak, colonists from another continent are already establishing settlements along the coast and spread their diseases amongst the locals. Right now, a massive plague is spreading across the tribe, and within few months, it will decimate them to the point where they will no longer pose a threat to anyone. The flow of history will remain changed, but in the end, all pieces will fall back into place. You would be surprised how adept organic minds are at creating visions of history that fit their own agendas, but that no longer concerns you, any of you. The wheel of fate will turn as intended for this world, and thanks to your decision, people of Akatan will have a future somewhere else, and somehow I feel that you, as a chronicler, will soon have much more work on your hands.
Brother Zakran? Brother Zakran! Stars cursed you, we do not have time for your nonsense. Haven't you heard the message from the Grandmaster? Oh, sister. My apologies, I was so engrossed in my work that I zoned out. What message are you talking about? Oh, for the love of... Look, Commonwealth fleet is on its way towards our base, so we're evacuating the facility and moving to a temporary location in this space. But what's more, he also ordered all Terran files except those with level 9 clearance to be purged. We cannot allow humans to realize just how closely our order has monitored their history, which means that this file you have there has to be erased from all databanks. But I cannot allow this. This file is too important for us to just throw it into a star. It's not my decision, brother, and you know it. What even is this? The Arana Chronicle.
I reviewed it some cycles ago. Quite confusing, is it not? It is, but at the same time it's the only file we have that indicated that the Shroud openly worked with humans back when they were still on Earth. In fact, the very nature of that cooperation made contents of that file extremely valuable for our long-term research, not to mention that it raises multiple questions regarding our very order and its actions. And most importantly, it does not say what happened to Akatani Mayans. If this file is to be believed, they were moved somewhere, but we have zero indications where and when. We must delve... No, we don't. Brother, in case you haven't realized, the Unbidden have offered us an unprecedented opportunity to infiltrate their own home territory, which is a project that overshadows all others, no matter how important they may seem. So no, we do not have time nor an opportunity to let you indulge in your bizarre obsession with humanity. Whatever happened to those Akatanians will remain a secret, unless one of our secondary groups uncovers something about them in the future. But that's all I have to say. Now erase the file and get going. Of course, sister. Go on ahead, I will be with you shortly. Good, now, computer, can you copy this file into my neural implant? Then do it right now and erase the file afterwards. I'm not going to just abandon my research for answers because bloody Grandmaster wants it. What are you muttering back there, Zachran? Nothing, dear sister. I just wondered, if we're going into Unbidden territory, then shouldn't we make some more preparations? Ah yes, I almost forgot. Our current forms may be a bit too unwieldy to survive the trip, so we're going to need new bodies. So as soon as you're done packing and erasing the files, get yourself to the Bioforge, and I'll see you in the next one.
Well, so that ending was probably just as unexpected for you as it was for me, but unfortunately, despite my best efforts, I am no longer able to continue this series. See, as you probably are aware, Paradox released Manchu updates some time back, and I thought I was prepared for it, with backup files and previous versions and all that stuff I was doing during my previous series, during which Stellaris received a ton of updates and yet I still managed to keep it going. This time, however, despite all my precautions, I was not able to continue the game, because every time I tried, Steam just gave me an error message and refused to cooperate. I was able to get the game itself working on the older version, but that meant nothing because I had some mods installed, and even though I was able to load the game, it just crashed as soon as I unpaused it. I believe it has something to do with the new mod manager, because for some reason it seemed to read every mod twice, but in the end it doesn't matter. The game wouldn't load, so I had to end the series, and although it's not exactly the ending I had in mind, I feel that I at least managed to give that particular story some closure. Slightly deranged and convoluted, true, but still closure. And I have to say that this series was surprisingly fun to make. That kind of constant, chronicle-like narration is actually quite pleasant to write, and as you could see, I was even able to make these episodes every week. Well, most of the time, that is. Although I have to say that, as far as Paradox games go, Europa Universalis may be one of the worst ones to make a story out of, simply because of its large scale and lack of focus on characters. Granted, Stellaris is pretty much the same, but at the very least it has some flashy, pretty-looking stars and spaceships to look at while I'm rambling in the background, and you can use technology to make your characters live significantly longer. So then, lesson learned, and if I'll ever do another story using EU4 as a base, then I would have to figure out some ways of spicing it up a bit, but then again, perhaps we could simply consider this series as a sort of audiobook and leave it at that. So, as to what happens to our Mayans, well, perhaps we'll learn something about their adventures in the future, but for now, I believe it's time to focus on another series, the Age of Wonders one. As I said before during the votes, it's going to be a bit more standard affair in terms of writing, with dialogue interludes and all that stuff, but at the same time it also means that it's going to come out every 2 weeks, like Second Chance and Crownless Eagle. And when it's going to come out? Well, if everything goes well, and I'm not too lazy, then episode 1 should be ready for November 2nd, so exactly 1 month from now. Well, so I guess that's it for this series. I know it ended sooner than expected, and certainly in a weirder manner, but I still hope that you enjoyed that narrative experiment, and I hope I'll see you around when the next series comes out. See you next time.